Hello, everybody.
Hello, hello there.
How are we today? Hopefully we are doing great.
Hello.
Hi, David.
I don't know if I'm supposed to turn on my video yet or not, but I'm here.
No, you're more than welcome. So we're going to get started. Welcome, everybody, to CMX Connect Madrid. And I've actually just realized I'm the only one based in Madrid. So if you are based in Madrid and you're here joining us today, let me know in the chat. These virtual events have enabled us to really go global with CMX Connect. So we have people from all over the world. I know we have Jamie, you're in Stockholm, Sweden. Seppi's in Malaga. David's in San Francisco. I mean, what better cities, right? Let's get started by introducing ourselves. So if you haven't met me before, my name's Valentina, one of the co-chapter leads here at CMX Connect Madrid. I have my own communities, Eat Out, Eat in Madrid, and a lot of you will know that I'm also a community manager here at CMX. Seppi?
Thanks, Valentina. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm Seppi, rhymes with Peppy. I was living in Madrid for 5 years, originally from Houston, Texas, just moved to Malaga, but I'm a co-host here at CMX Connect Madrid. And I'm the founder of She Hit Refresh. That's my community for women aged 30 and up who want to change their life in a big way through travel.
Perfect. Now, before we get started, a little bit of an intro into CMX Connect. It's a local program by CMX, powered by Bevy. What you're seeing right now and interacting in is the Bevy platform, an amazing platform. And its goals are to bring together people from all over the world in local chapters to advocate for the community industry, to meet somebody new, and to get an idea or actionable strategy that you can implement literally straight after the event. So hopefully you will do that today. There are over 60 different chapters of CMX Connect. If you are joining us from somewhere else in the world, make sure you check out events.cmxhub.com, where you can see all the different regions and all the different chapters. And if there isn't one in your region or a city, you can apply to start your own. Now, a few little announcements before we get started. We have CMX Spark next week on April 20th. And actually, all four of us on camera right now will also be on camera at the event. So really exciting. This is a one-day community conference dedicated to those in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And we have over 26 different speakers that are going to be talking, doing workshops, discussions over 5 hours. So make sure you RSVP and join us for that. It'll be 9 a.m. till 2 p.m. GMT. And actually, David is going to be doing an exclusive workshop just after CMX Spark called The Business of Belonging. And it's a really great in-depth workshop. It's interactive and you'll take lots away from that. We'll share all the links in the chat to that. But that's what we've got going on next week. Seppi, do you want to talk about what we're doing today?
Yes. All right. Very excited for tonight. So tonight is actually the final stop for the Business of Belonging book tour with David Spinks, who's here with us. But it's also the launch of the CMX Book Club that Jamie Johnston will be leading. So for tonight's agenda, we're going to start off with an interview that Jamie will do with David. And then you'll have a chance to ADA, ask David anything. And so how this is going to work, it's going to work a little different tonight. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A box that you can find at the top of the chat box. Drop them in there. And what's going to be different tonight is if your question is selected, we will ask you to come off mute and ask your question, because your question and your voice will be used in Jamie's own podcast for the Book Club Community Podcast. So again, drop your questions in the Q&A box. If your question is selected, we'll ask you to come off mute and ask that question, and then your voice will be used on the Book Club Community Podcast. After the Q&A, we're going to have a live raffle where you can win your own copy of the Business of Belonging book and a seat at the CMX at the Business of Belonging workshop at the CMX Spark event that Valentina just mentioned. And you also get a copy of the book if you win that. And then at the very end, Valentina will let us know what's next for CMX Connect Madrid and the book club. All right, so you guys got that. That was a lot of information. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce Jamie, who will be introducing David. And so, Jamie, we're so happy to have you join us here. Jamie Johnston is a community professional with experience at Sky UK, Tesco, as well as being a CMX Connect host, or former CMX Connect host, and now he's at Spotify. He specializes in community and content strategy, editorial, people management, and customer experience measurement. So, Jamie, I'm going to hand the mic to you.
Thank you very much. And hi, everyone. And thanks, David, for coming along. It's great to get this opportunity to talk to you and especially to kick off this new series of events. So just before I start talking to David, just to say, yeah, really excited to launch these series of events, focusing on the books around our industry, around community building. I think in the past, it's kind of slim pickings to some degree, but more recently, there's so many great things coming out, not least David's book. So I'm really excited to do this. We're going to run a few events like this, interviewing the author and hearing from them. But then we'll run some smaller discussion groups and really dig into the book. And as Seppi mentioned, we'll do a podcast as well and really provide a bit of flavor to all these great books that are coming out. So to David, who we all know so well, has done so much for the industry, but it's so appropriate that this first event is with him. I'm going to say Spinks. I don't know if that's okay, but I'm going to call you Spinks for this little intro. So Spinks launched his first online community at 14 years old for his favorite video game, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4. Now, I remember that too, but I don't think I was good at playing it as you were. Today, he's become a prominent leader in the community-driven business movement and has trained and advised community teams at companies like Google, Facebook, Waze, Airbnb. The list is long. He's believed that community is the future of business, has made it his life's purpose to help others learn how to build thriving, meaningful communities. He's the co-founder of CMX, with over 20,000 community professionals gather, and he's the host of CMX Summit, the largest conference in the community industry. In 2019, CMX was acquired by Bevy, where Spinks now serves as the VP of Community, helping companies launch and scale event-driven community programs. So, take a breath. Welcome, David, on this last leg of your book tour. Are you tired yet? You're muted.
All right. How's that?
You're in.
I'm in. Very tired to the extent that I forget to unmute myself. That's how tired I am. But feeling good. Lots of excitement around the book. And actually, all my friends end up calling me Spinks. So if you want to just use Spinks the whole time, for that.
Okay,
I've had good friends before that didn't even know my first name was David. So
yeah, okay, good to know. So yeah, congrats on the book. Really enjoyed reading it. I think your passion, really shines through. It's very clear. It seems very personally written. And before we get into the contents of the book, and I know we don't have lots and lots of time, and I do want to make sure people get the opportunity to hear from you around some of the things that you talk about. At the beginning, I'd asked you to choose a bit of music that kind of plays a role in the writing process for you. So we played that at the beginning there, Lane 8. The first track was Run. I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit about, why you chose that, what role music plays for you when you're, trying to be creative and when you're writing like that.
That's a great question. Music's actually where I found one of my first communities as well. So Tony Hawk was like when I found it online because I couldn't really find it in person. But then actually probably the first place I found a real sense of community in person was in the hardcore music scene in Long Island in New York. And if you're not familiar with hardcore, which you probably aren't, it's like a very underground kind of music scene. you probably know metal, but it's not even metal. It's like metal's like mainstream compared to hardcore. Hardcore is like grungy, chuggy, growly, just like angry music, which I guess was fitting for like an angsty teen. But I ended up getting into that scene in Long Island, and while the music itself was very kind of like angry and aggressive, the people in it were actually some of the kindest, most interesting people I had ever met, and there was an incredible sense of community in that scene, and I really found that belonging there in a way that I didn't in my local hometown. I had to go out of town to find that scene. So music's always been something that has been a huge part of my life. I feel like I have a soundtrack to my life every day. Like I have certain music I listen to in the morning, and then lane 8 and like electronic stuff like that, it becomes my like work music when I'm really trying to get into the flow, and I find it helps me get into the flow of writing. And someone recently asked me what was my strategy for writing the book, and because like every author seems to find a different approach. Some of them like to verbalize it, so they'll read it out using their voice and have it transcribed. Other people like to do it in like very small chunks, or have like a huge outline already laid out and then just work on little bits and pieces. I tried all the shortcuts and none of it worked for me. The only thing that worked for me in the end was like setting aside 3 to 4 hours to just sit and just get through it. And I'd usually spend the first hour just crying and struggling, and then I'd get into flow into the next couple hours. And that kind of like lane 8, it's like a flowy electronic music, just has always helped me kind of get in that mindset.
Yeah, totally understood. So something less lyrical and a bit more instrumental, and helping you get And just a little bit on the writing process. So is that a late night thing or an early morning thing? Like, when's the best time?
Yeah, I had tried a bunch. For a while, I was trying to write every morning before work, so I'd put like an hour in. But it would be really hard because it would take me at least half an hour to get into the flow. So what ended up working was honestly weekends. I would take the morning, pretty much like every Saturday, and towards the end, it was like Saturday and Sunday. I'd get up and I just go straight to a coffee shop. And I get a chai latte because I haven't been drinking coffee for over a year now. And I would just put my headphones in and crank it out and, try to get as much as I could done before noon. And then I'd have the rest of the day to enjoy my weekend. And we have a 7-month-old now too, which is another reason why I'm very tired. But
and you gave up coffee?
Yeah. Yeah, I really glutton for punishment. And he was due the same date as my manuscript was due, like the same week. So it was a very hard deadline, and gave, now I wouldn't be able to do that because we have to take care of the baby. But at the time I was able to take 4 hours and just disappear. And so took advantage of getting the book out before the baby arrived in the world.
Yeah, that's a great deadline. Yeah, they don't come around very often. So with the book, I mean, you said there before, some people have a clear kind of outline. Did you have a kind of like a structure, a narrative in mind? Or, I mean, there's obviously lots of elements to community building, but did you have quite a clear structure in mind as you wrote it out?
I even wrote a couple drafts of the book that just never saw the light of the day over the last 5 years. And I've written a few different versions of this book. I went through phases where I was like, I don't want it to be too practical and like workshopy because I want it to be more broadly appealing. And then I would go the other direction and be like, no, I'm just going to have the very, very in the weeds playbook. And I ended up with sort of a hybrid of like kicking off with kind of like the big picture of the industry and what it means to do this work, building community for a business, and why it's important and why it's valuable. And then kind of getting more and more into detail as the book goes on. But I mean, I probably went through 100 different versions of an outline and added things and took them away. And I completely redid it probably 3 or 4 times after having already worked on it a lot, which takes days to redo once you're like, I'm going to completely restructure this. And now that's the hardest part about a book. Like an article, you want to restructure it, great. You can spend an hour and like reorganize it. A book, now it's like, well, I referenced chapter 2 when I was writing chapter 4. And so now I have to comb back through everything in the book to see like where I reference things to make sure that I'm not referencing something that's actually coming later in the book now. And so every time you redo it, it just completely, it takes a ton of time to come back through. And my style of working is very kind of like mooshing things around and just seeing what feels right and changing a lot, kind of very artistic in that way. And so that wasn't very efficient. Writing this book was the hardest thing I've ever done.
Yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to dig into. I think, like, you know, I know a few authors, and it's even for people that writing is easy, the overall process is pretty painful for most of the time. And like you say, you need to redo it or restructure it. What did thinking about the audience, like, well, okay, I'll rephrase it a little bit. What kind of changed your mind then? You said you sort of moved between these two things of being in the weeds, you know, being really practical for people, and maybe something slightly more high level. Was it thinking about the audience and who the book was for that kind of helped you make your decision?
Yeah, absolutely. And I flip-flopped on that a bunch too. I'm like, am I writing this to get, you know, business leaders and executives bought into community, or am I writing this for the community manager to be able to like keep on their desk and have a playbook for how to do this work? And despite the advice of like a lot of people in my publisher, I ended up trying to achieve both. And I think it does a pretty good job, because the idea in my mind was I want this to be a book that the community professionals and just be like, read this and you'll understand, you know, why this work is important, why it's valuable, and how to create a strategy. So I wanted to kind of at least kick off. And so the first couple chapters are just like why community is a new competitive advantage, how to create a, you know, a high level community strategy and understand the business value. So it's stuff that I've had a lot of executives read it already and be like, oh, I finally get this now. Like, you've finally explained this in a way where it really makes sense, and I understand how we should be investing in community. And then, like I said, it just continues to go more into the weeds of, okay, now how do you design community structures, all the way into the tactics of how do you get people excited to participate in communities. And it turns out, like, once they're bought into the concept of community, executives and leadership are really interested in that stuff too, because they want to know how it works. They want to know what it actually takes to build community and what this community team that they're building is doing day to day.
And it felt like, you know, there's quite a lot of theory and, you know, research that had gone in. I wondered, like, is that something that you enjoyed, like doing that research, and do you enjoy that sort of theoretical side of things, or was that something that you had to kind of plumb into the book?
No, I love the theory stuff. That's like where my brain usually lives. I love interviewing community psychologists and network theorists and just really understanding. I love thinking like on that high level of why this stuff works the way it does, and how to understand it in the context of science and psychology and history. Um, and so honestly, I didn't have to do much research for the book to find those things. It was just all stuff that's been living in my head that the book just kind of forced me to put it all together into one cohesive narrative. Yeah, the harder stuff for me, honestly, is like getting the examples, because I love thinking about things theoretically, but then it's like, well, what does this look like in the real world with real companies? And it's like, my brain doesn't just naturally gravitate toward that. So that was the harder part to include in the book.
Okay. And so was that a case of, like, did you use some sort of community principles yourself to create the book? Like, in terms of, you know, enlisting certain people, and, you know, did you have kind of power users that supported you through the process? Like, how did you manage that in terms of getting certain contributors?
Yeah, so I tried to take a community approach to writing the book, all the way from the very beginning of, you know, I basically was just continuously saying like, hey, I'm writing this book. Who wants to help? Who wants to be involved? In what ways? and people would raise their hand. And so I had people giving me feedback on the outline. I was sharing the titles and subtitles and cover designs with the CMX community to get everyone's feedback on it. Had multiple people from the community editing the first drafts of it, and they all get shout outs at the end of the book as well. Um, and then started building up the kind of like early adopter audience as well by saying, you know, this is going to become available for pre-order soon. It's not available yet. If you'd like to be notified when it is available and kind of be involved in the process leading up to that, I created a newsletter which ended up with about 300 people subscribed to it by the time the book launched, where I was just sharing like updates on the book, things I was learning about publishing, sharing covers, sharing details, sharing conversations I've had with my publisher, and just like keeping that group engaged all the way up to the point where it's like, okay, now, you know, the pre-sale is finally available. And those people became really great advocates. They bought the first copies of the book. A lot of them are writing the first reviews that are on there. So taking that community approach was a huge impact for the book.
Cool. So you made chapter 1 available to everyone that's attending. So thanks very much for that. I've got loads of questions, but I thought I would frame a few from the first chapter, just assuming most people have read that. So straight away in the book, you ask this kind of $1 million question, you know, why are you investing in community? Or at least that's the question you ask when you go into a business. Is it common that most people can't answer that in your experience?
Yeah, not very concisely. Usually it's a long-winded answer that kind of dips their toes into a cultural belief in community, some like loose objectives or metrics that they're thinking about, and ends with, you know, but we don't really know. We're still trying to figure it out. So I do think companies definitely struggle with that.
And you give a really good example from Erica Kuhl at Salesforce. I thought that might be quite a good example if you could just talk through that a little bit for people in terms of how she was successful at being able to kind of land community successfully and grow it at Salesforce.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like Salesforce today is one of the gold standards of community for B2B companies. And I think Erica Kuhl is a gold standard for how to be really successful at doing this work and building a career in community. So it was like the obvious first kind of case study to share in terms of, you know, a modern day or a program that's really successful today. So Erica, she had been working at Salesforce for several years before she got into building community. She was working with, I think it was marketing at first, but basically had the opportunity to connect with a lot of customers and just found that like the customers were sharing a lot of feedback and wanting to get involved and wanting to support each other. And, you know, people wanted to be advocates and no one was doing anything with that. So because she had already been a part of the company and had been very successful, because she's, you know, one of the hardest working people I've ever met, extremely smart, extremely inspirational, getting other people excited about things. So she was already very successful at Salesforce and basically sat down with the CMO and her boss in marketing and basically said like, I think we need to invest in community and start a program up around this. And they kind of just like took a leap of faith because they trusted her. And so they said, all right, cool, like give it a shot and let's see how it goes. And it wasn't easy at first. But one thing that she did really smartly and really well is she started with one core objective that she would focus on. And this is still the mistake that most companies make today is they kick off community programs. They have a solo community manager, usually like one person doing it, and they try to impact all these different objectives within the company, right? I share the spaces model in the book, right? So it could be support, products, acquisition and marketing, contribution on like a platform, engagement and customer retention, customer success. You have all these different kind of objectives that community can drive, and companies end up, starting off by trying to achieve too many of them. But what Erica did is she focused in on marketing to start, because it was the team she was a part of. So she knew she had to align with the objectives that she was accountable to and her team was accountable to. She knew she could measure it and get resources to be able to like get this data and track it. And she knew that was important to the company at large. And that she always believed that community would actually have even more impact by going into customer success and going into product and going into some other parts of the business. But she knew that she wouldn't get buy-in for that right away, and she shouldn't take on too much. So she did it for marketing, and she was able to prove that customers who participated in the community were increasing their investment in the company and spending more. She was able to show how community was driving growth for the business, and made a clear case for it. And that was how she got buy-in, because when she was able to communicate that clear value, it became much easier to say, all right, like now I want to launch a community program on the product side. Here's the budget and resources and team and staff I need. And she methodically grew it out from there all the way to the point today where now, Salesforce is investing in community in all 6 areas of the Spaces model. And they have a really large team. It's part of all their different product suites. It's like a core part of Salesforce. The Trailblazer program's got 1,000+ chapters around the world and millions of community members participating. It's a massive, massive program, but it exists, and it was successful because Erica knew what objective she was trying to achieve at first and built the community program intentionally to try to achieve that objective rather than just building community for the sake of community.
Right. Yeah, it's a great example. And one thing that, you talk about measurement there, and without getting right into the weeds of measurement, one thing that you talk about in the book is this sense of community and this theory as well by, psychologists. So I think that resonates with lots of people. Like, I'm interested in the theory too, but one thing for that around the sense of community is in terms of measurement. I think you start to provide some really good examples. Can you talk a little bit about why a sense of community is important in the first place, and then how we can go about measuring it?
Yeah. So I think I talk about this in the book. It's like we need to, for a business to understand what it means to invest in community, to do it successfully, they need to distinguish first off between community as a cultural and emotional value and community as like a business operation. And when we talk about community, we convolute those two things, and we're often talking about we kind of like think about one when we actually need the other, right? And so companies say like, yeah, we're community driven or community led, and that might mean that they have a cultural value of community and they want to like build relationships and connect with people, but that's not the community operation. So that's why I ask, if you say you're a community driven or community led company, it's like, show me the receipts. Well, what does your community team look like? What does your budget look like? What tools and spaces are you using to facilitate connection? What does your actual community operation look like? It's first off just understanding that when we talk about community, you can be talking about that emotional value, or you can be talking about the actual work of community organizing and facilitation and activation. One is a foundation for the other, though, because you need people to feel a sense of community in order for them to be motivated to want to contribute to that community. And the only way a community program works, whether it's a support forum where you want people to be answering questions for each other, or a chapter program like an ambassador program where people are hosting events representing your brand, those people aren't going to show up and help other members unless they feel a sense of commitment, of community, of wanting to contribute to that group of people. So you need community, the sense of community, the emotional value as a foundation in order for community operations, community programs to be successful. Now, as far as measurement, those two things can be measured in different ways as well, because a lot of the metrics we often talk about are actually measuring these kinds of community operations or programs, not necessarily a sense of community, right? We're looking at like active users, monthly active users, daily active users, weekly active users, stickiness score, which is DAU over MAU, dividing your daily active users by monthly active users to basically see like of your month, the people coming in every month, how many of those are showing up every day, and it gives you an idea of like, are people consistently coming? Now that it's a latent measure, it's a lag measure, because the belief is if they feel a sense of community, they're going to keep showing up every day. So by seeing them showing up that often, that means that they feel a sense of community. Is that true? Not always, right? Like, do I feel a sense of community on Facebook? I may still use it every day because I'm addicted. That doesn't necessarily mean I feel a sense of community. So there's lots of reasons that people might show up and participate, but still not be having a very positive community experience where they feel safe and included and a sense of belonging. And so that's where, yeah, you can measure sense of community. And there's a range of depth. I would recommend not overcomplicating it. The sense of community comes with this survey called the Sense of Community Index, which is like a survey you can send to your community, and they fill it out, and you do an analysis that then gives you scores that will help you understand like the sense of community in your group. It's pretty complex to run that survey and get that score. I don't think it's the right move for most people. I think you can be a lot more simple. And something we do in our surveys is just like after events, we send surveys, or we do regular community surveys of our online spaces. And in there, we can just ask a few simple questions like, do you feel welcome in this community? Have you gotten the value out of this community that you expected to get when you showed up here? Have you formed any close relationships with other members in this community? So just a few questions that can give you an idea of whether that person feels like they're forming real relationships, that they feel safe in the community, and that they're getting value out of it.
And I think a lot of people can be a bit overwhelmed, you know, especially the qualitative kind of measures and surveys. So I think you've got some really useful tips for people around, you know, who to talk to. So I wondered if there's anything you wanted to recount from the book around that, like in terms of, you know, it's a bit like when you put a survey out, right? It's certain people that fill it in. How do you make sure you reach these other groups of people, and why is that important?
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, surveying is always hard. It's hard to get people to show up. You know, we're running a survey right now for CMX, and you know, the Slack community has responded a whole lot, and the Facebook group hasn't responded that much. And so now we're like, well, I guess 80% of our community is active in Slack. It's like, well, no, it's just distribution bias. So you just need to account for that distribution bias and be aware of it. Katie Kobe is a really great expert in community surveying, and I share some of her advice in the book about how to account for bias. Things like time of day are a big thing as well, because you might get different groups if you send out a survey or promote it in the morning versus the evening, especially if people are in different time zones. You want to also ask questions that help you see kind of the different members in your community. So we ask a lot of kind of questions in our surveys of like, what industry are you in? Are you B2B or B2C? Are you a big company or small company? How long have you been in our community? Because we want to know, are new members having a different experience than our long established members? Like maybe there's an insight there that comes out of it that raises a red flag of like, oh, we're welcoming our new members feel very plugged in. So just asking questions that help you understand the different groups that you want to get insights from within the community, and then just accounting for some of the different biases that are going to influence the data. It's pretty hard to avoid any bias in it, especially, you know, for surveys where you're not working with a full research team that's doing a full analysis and, you know, being extremely thorough at getting every single detail right. I don't think you have to worry about that. I think your goal with any of these surveys are to find answers to questions. Just getting insight for the sake of getting insight is not that helpful. You want to go in understanding how are we going to use the answers to this question to help us make better decisions in the future. And if you do that, even with some bias, you're going to learn a lot about how you can improve your community.
Right on. So there's a big section, you know, a big meat of the book is talking about the social identity cycle, and then you break this down into various phases. I wondered if that model or that framework is something that you've arrived at over time. Is it an amalgamation of different things?
Exactly.
Like, yeah, what brought that together for you?
Yeah. So, you know, we've been working on frameworks for the last 7 years with CMX. And so the social identity cycle actually came out of, it's an adaptation of a previous model that we developed called the community engagement cycle, which I think was like identity, trust, participation, and reward. And just like going through teaching it a lot of times and seeing it in practice and working on it with companies, ended up removing trust essentially from it and honing in on identification, participation, and validation. Because trust isn't a step in my mind, it's a piece of everything, right? It's like trust goes into why and how people identify. Trust goes into why and how people participate, and trust goes into why and how you reward and validate members for their contribution. Like trust is the foundation of community. So it shows up everything. It's not just a stage in that cycle. And yeah, that just came through, you know, also taking inspiration from things like the habit loop, or the hooked cycle from Nir Eyal that talks about like how people form habits in using products, online products specifically, and a lot of them are like online communities. And I thought that really applied really well in this idea of just wanting to understand, how does someone come to participate in a community regularly? How do they come to form a habit of showing up in a community? What is that experience? So it's a model that aims to help you put yourself in the shoes of the community member that you're trying to engage and trying to make them feel that sense of community. And how are they identifying with the group from day one? How are they participating, and what are the opportunities to participate? And then how do they, or whether or not they feel a sense of validation for that participation that then reinforces that identity for them, and continues the loop. And when you read it, I hope you like think about any community you've ever joined and think about those 3 stages, and I guarantee you'll see how those 3 showed up for you in a consistent way over time that resulted in you feeling a really strong sense of social identity. And one other model that's relevant to it is a social identity theory, which is a psychological theory that was formed by Henry Tajfel, and that's about how people form groups, and that was based on research onto like inside and outside groups. So how groups form insularity and then feel a sense of, you know, competition, or even like seeing another group as an enemy, and how people form a social identity over time. So that kind of lays out the stages of how people form a stronger social identity. And the social identity cycle we created in order to better understand, how does someone actually move from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3.
Yeah, and I think that's what's really useful in there. Like, you know, there's a lot of different frameworks, but there's some very practical things around, you know, identity tree, like to actually map that out through the commitment curve, you know, and actually segmenting your groups and thinking about tactics for each. So yeah, some really useful things for people. Again, without going, I mean, you can get into rewards and motivation, but I think it's one that, you know, comes up all the time. And I think you do a really good job of talking about this balance between extrinsic and intrinsic.
Yeah.
And one of the things that comes up a lot, you know, is, okay, should we be giving swag out, or how much should we do? And I wondered about this balance between, you know, just giving someone, it is extrinsic validation by, you know, by if someone posts or contributes, that you essentially acknowledge that, you know, and that can go a long way. And in a way that is a kind of reward. I just wondered, like, how far can that go in terms of simple just acknowledgement and encouragement and validation of people's contributions, you know, versus rewards and swag, as it were? And can you go too far either direction?
Yeah, you can. You know, I think, I mean, you see companies that have a community that's completely unengaged, and then there's an inclination to think, well, we can gamify this and add badges or rewards or points, and that will make people participate. And that's just not true, right? If people don't have that fundamental intrinsic motivation, adding swag, adding some rewards, it probably will increase some activity in the short run, but it's not sustainable, because as soon as that reward disappears or no longer becomes valuable to them, which that's something that happens, right? Like once you get a reward, that becomes a new normal, and now you need increased rewards to continue to incentivize them. And so you won't be able to use extrinsic motivation as a replacement for intrinsic motivation. What you can do is use extrinsic motivation to validate the intrinsic motivation. So basically, like if somebody is participating a lot, they do something great in the community, and you use it to surprise them with a really nice thank you and a gift, and say, like, thank you so much for answering all those questions for other community members who are hosting lots of events. We want to send you a little gift to say thank you. That's still on like the social norms level of, you know, the same way you would give a gift to a friend in a way. And so you just have to be careful about not adding so many extrinsic rewards that it replaces the intrinsic motivation, because that can happen as well. And that switches someone's mind from a social norm into a market norm, which is something Dan Ariely talks about in Predictably Irrational. You know, a social norm is what you would do for a friend or for somebody that you care about or a community you care about. Market norms become, you know, supply and demand. And it's the difference of if a friend asks you to help them move and they just said, hey, you know, I really could use your help. Can you come over? I'll order some pizza and beer. We'll hang out. I'm very likely to do that and help out because, you know, it's a friend. I want to help them and do a favor. Whereas if they said, hey, can you come help me move? I'll give you $100. Now it changes my mind into a market norm. And now I'm thinking, well, is it worth $100 for me to spend all that time and energy? I'm now no longer thinking about just helping a friend. It's just like, well, it feels weird that they would even offer me money for it, right? And it's the same thing that can happen in a community where people were doing things because they care about each other, they care about the community, they want to give back. And then you start like making it a trade of like, well, if you do this, you get points, or if you do this, you get rewards. Or now we're seeing, you know, with crypto and NFTs, there's a lot of, you know, a lot of people experimenting with like adding coins to community that have an actual financial value. And it's very interesting in some ways because then people can get rewarded for their contributions, but the risk will be that people start to do it because of the transactional value. It becomes a market rather than a community, which, you know, isn't driven by a market in the same way.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to hop right in because we are going to move into the Q&A, Jamie. I just want to make sure we have a few questions here. I want to make sure that we can get to them without going over for today's event. So
yes.
Thank you so much, David and Jamie. Let me turn my camera on here. Sorry to like jump in so abruptly, but I just noticed the time. So
No,
we have,
so good.
let's
Those are
see,
great questions, by the way, Jamie. None of those questions are questions I've been asked yet on a book interview. So very well done.
Thanks, David, for your time. It's great.
Of course.
Fabulous. All right, so I'm gonna throw it to Peter. Peter, I'm gonna put you on presenter mode here. So feel free to turn off your audio, even if you want video as well, you can turn that on, and ask your question here to David directly.
Hey guys, Jamie, great job. David, thanks for your insights. I'm just going to read the question off because I think I phrased it reasonably well. Were there any, so this is about the writing process specifically. Were there any aha moments in particular during the writing process, which for you provoked either a change in direction or that gave you a clear idea of what you wanted the book to be or look like or represent?
That's a great question. My initial thought is like, no. It was just a slog through and through. But one thing that comes to mind is even just the title, because you overthink the title so much. And Business of Belonging was actually like one of the first, it might have been the first title I came up with. But then, of course, we're like, well, we have to come up with more ideas. I probably came up with 150 different title ideas and ended up pitching a different one to the publisher, and my editor liked it. They were really pushing me to have a very practical title, like an explicit title that's like community strategy or something. So it's like you see the title, you immediately know what it is, whereas the Business of Belonging is more abstract. And so we're coming up with all these more like practical, explicit titles. And we ended up submitting one, and the marketing team at the publisher declined it, which I didn't know that could happen. But it turns out the marketing team has a strong say on what the title ends up being. And I was like a little disappointed, but I didn't love that title anyway. So I was a little bit relieved. And then I ended up like combing back through all of the titles we came up with, and the Business of Belonging just like jumped out at me, and I was like, that stuck with me always. Like that title always just felt good, and it felt like the right amount of tension, which is something that you hear a lot about in book writing, is especially when coming with a title, is like finding tension in it. And so if you look at a lot of books about community today, and there are a lot of incredible ones. Most of them are on this bookshelf. I've learned a ton from all these authors, but they usually kind of tiptoe around the concept of building community for business, because it feels a little icky in a way of like combining the market norms with the social norms, community with business. And so the two words, business and belonging, in some ways have that tension for me. And that was an aha moment, because I was like, that title feels right. And that's what I really want to lean into with this book, is to not tiptoe around the concept of building community for business. We're going to go right at it and really talk about what is community in this context. What does it mean when a business builds community? What's the risk of it? Like, what are the real risks of us turning to companies for belonging? And be able to speak very directly to it in a way that I hadn't seen done before. And once that clicked, that helped a lot of the messaging and the content and the focus that would come out of that message.
Mute. Fabulous. All right, and we're going to take one more question, and then we're going to move on to our live raffle. So Marte has an amazing question, especially with CMX Spark coming up next week. I think this is a relevant one. So Marte, if you want to come off mute and ask your question directly to David. You got it? Or I can ask for you. Can you get the mute button there? If not, I will ask it here. For the sake of time here, I'll go ahead and ask. So, David, Marta's question is, have you noticed notable differences in gaining trust and confidence from customers, public, among regions? So with users such as US versus the EU, perhaps more difficult to obtain engagement in the EU?
I mean, frankly, most of my experience just being in the U.S. is in the U.S., and that's why we empower our community to self-organize on a more local level, because Seppi and Valentina know a lot more about the Madrid community than I could ever hope to, and this is a great example where there's been incredible engagement in our local communities that are run by local ambassadors. So culturally, I think there's always going to be differences in every region, and things that work in one region are not going to work in another region. And that's why I think it's really important to push out control as much as possible. Philippe, I quote him in the book, Philippe Bidet he was at Wikipedia and then Reddit, once told me that a community builder's job is to push out control as far as possible. And so if you put control in the hands of people who are the closest to their community, that's how you'll be able to be successful building community, rather than you trying to figure out how to create a standard across the entire globe, which is going to be very hard. If you want, I could take one more very quick question. I can answer it very quickly.
Very quick, very quick. We do have one more. So Andrew, if you want to ask real quick, is Andrew still here? I don't think Andrew's still here, but let me ask this question. So Andrew asks, could you see a scenario where you expand the space model to include a new type of business value? If so, what could that be?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think Spaces is pretty comprehensive. A couple that have come up would be like impact is one interesting one of, just some, especially when you're looking at, nonprofits or politics, not necessarily always for a business, but just thinking about like some impact that you're trying to have on the world that isn't necessarily tied to the bottom line. But that said, I think the point of the Spaces model is to help us understand how community connects back to the bottom line, and impact just kind of falls in a different category for what businesses are investing in, to me. Another one that's interesting is recruiting. I think like a lot of companies end up getting to hire people from their community, and that's actually super valuable because hiring is extremely expensive, and hiring great people is very hard and can make or break a company. So that's one that's come up here and there, but not making it Spacers anytime soon.
Real quickly, which is the better hardcore, NYC hardcore, leftover crack? But he's not here to find out your answer.
Right. Well, I think these bands are a little bit more on the punk hardcore kind of side, which again, like these like sub communities in music are so unique. So I didn't really listen to either of those, but some of my favorite bands were like Remembering Never, Bury Your Dead, Misery Signals, Every Time I Die. So very positive, very uplifting music.
Thank you for sharing. All right. Well, thank you so much. We're not done yet, so guys, don't leave. But let's give a virtual round of applause here for Jamie and David. Thank you so much for that insightful interview. I'm going to hand it over to Valentina, who's going to be going and running our live raffle here. So don't leave. You got to stay to win.
Yes. So as we mentioned earlier, we have 2 prizes up for grabs. We have a copy of The Business of Belonging and a seat at David's workshop next week on April 20th at CMX Bar, which does include the book. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen and get our little wheel of names going. And all of the names on here, hopefully you can see it okay. All of the names on here are people that RSVP'd to the event. So some of them may not be here. We'll just keep spinning until we find someone that's here. So make sure if you are chosen that you let me know in the chat. Would hate to move on when you've won a prize, but you didn't let us know. So let's go with the first one, which is going to be the Business of Belonging book. Let's see. And the winner is Danny Weinstein. Well done. You have won a Business of Belonging book. I think Danny is still here.
Mazel tov,
Hopefully,
Danny.
let us know. It seems like he is. He's here. Perfect. Great. Okay. Danny, if you can just send me a direct message here in the Bevy platform, your email, so I can get that to you. And let's move on to the next prize. This is the workshop, including the book. Here we go. And the winner is, it's Sophia. Is Sophia still here? Let's check. I believe she is. Yes, well done. Send me a DM with your email. Well done to the both of you. As we said before, you can grab the book anywhere and everywhere, basically. If you just type in the Business of Belonging into Google, you literally, all the results come up. And if you want to read the first chapter first, you head onto the CMX website. You can download the first chapter there. But you're going to want to read the whole book, so you might as well just buy the book. And yeah, I'm going to pass it back to Seppi, who's going to tell us about what's next for CMX Connect Madrid.
Nina, and yes, before I go to what's next, just let us know in the comments here what you loved about today's session. Again, just want to thank Jamie so much for that incredible interview, and David so much for your insightful answers. It was really special to have you guys here today. So show the love in the comments there. But what is next? Oh my gosh, can you guys believe it? That next month at our next CMX Connect event, we're going to be celebrating 2 years of CMX Connect Madrid. I can't believe it. I was just talking to Valentina the other day and I really thought only a year had passed, but no, it's been 2. So please join us on May 5th at 8 p.m. Madrid time, or Spain time, CEST. We are going to be celebrating our 24 events, 1,500 plus attendees that we've had over the past 2 years, and 850 check-ins over the past 2 years, not including this event. So these numbers are even greater than that. We just want to celebrate you guys, everything that we've done together, and celebrate this 2-year milestone. So please join us. We'll drop the link here in the comments for you to RSVP. And with that, if you'd like and just be more social with CMX, please join us at cmxhub.com. You can join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/CMX Hub, as well as our Slack channels. If you're on Slack, come join CMX at Community Managers, cmx.slack.com. We'll drop those in the comments as well. And if you're interested in podcasts, please check us out on pod.cmxhub.com. All right. And last but not least, just want to let you guys know that you'll be getting a follow-up email that will have a feedback form in there about today's event. We would love to have your feedback so we can hear from you and let you know what you loved about today's event and how we can even do these events even better. So be sure to keep an eye on that and fill that out for us. All right. I don't think I have anything else. Valentina, David, Jamie, any parting words?
Come to CMX Spark next week, and we'll see you there.
That's right. We'll all be there. So we'll see you guys there next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, David.
Bye.
Bye.